Kansas Cityans are observing a terrible and infamous anniversary on this July 17th. 10 years ago tonight, our city's worst disaster in terms of loss of life left us reeling in horror. It was a decade ago that the skywalks collapsed in the then-new Hyatt Regency Hotel in Crown Center. This was the first sign outside the gleaming new hotel that something was terribly wrong inside. Ambulances and emergency medical people by the dozens carrying bloody, broken people outside shortly after 7 in the evening. Inside, chaos and terror and death. As hundreds of Kansas Cityans and visitors crammed into the impressive atrium lobby for a night of entertainment at a summer tea dance, their world literally caved in, tons of it. 2 steel and concrete skywalks suspended by slender rods from the Hyatt ceiling just inside the hotel front windows collapsed on the crowd. Volunteers from construction companies and crane operators joined police, firefighters, doctors, and nurses, trying to rescue those still alive and unable to move in the crushing debris. Throughout the night they worked and saved many of the victims, some by actually amputating legs and arms to free them. Others already were dead or did not survive their injuries in the many hours of pain. The final grim toll, 114 dead, more than 200 injured. Months later, a federal investigation pinpointed the cause of the collapse. The design of the skywalks, long steel rods connected to box beam supports with small lock washer and nut assemblies, was flawed. Ultimately, they would have collapsed of their own weight. Hundreds of dancing people brought them down sooner. Structural engineers were found at fault. Crown Center Redevelopment Corporation, the hotel owner, settled with victims and their families for $40 million in a landmark class action liability case. It looked like a war zone. That is how one doctor described what he saw at the Hyatt 10 years ago.
The disaster called on every medical outfit in the whole metro area. And now, 10 years later, Roxanne Battle talked to some of the people who were there about what they learned and about how emergency medical care has gotten better.
This is Dr. Joseph Wackerly 10 years ago. He was in charge of search and rescue during the Hyatt disaster.
The first thing I remember is being overwhelmed with this emotional sense of, this is unbelievable. How do you deal with it?
That's the question he's had to answer then and now. He's just written a New England Journal of Medicine paper on disaster planning and response. He says even though Kansas City emergency staff performed nearly perfectly that fateful night, communication can still make them better.
The major problem with most disasters is communications, and if you can have good communications and coordinate everything and have people doing their job, then the logistical things like the supplies and equipment and the request for special equipment, mutual aid protocols, all falls into place.
In order to do their jobs, doctors, nurses, and paramedics responding to a disaster like the Hyatt have first got to get over the initial shock of the tragedy. And then, once the situation is over, they've got to learn to let go of those emotions so they can go on. Paramedic Deborah Wright is part of a team of Johnson County emergency workers and mental health professionals who now teach ambulance crews how to cope with disaster-related stress.
That's what the critical incident stress team is. It gets in there and helps them to cope with that.
You deal with it. You do your best.
And that's what I believe the community of Kansas City did that night.